the interesting point of this is that the housing industry in the United States became an industry that has two peculiar qualities. One, it places the vast majority of American working people into a condition of almost permanent debt. We are a population that spends an enormous portion of our adult life paying to a bank for the housing that we have. We are debt. It puts us in as a debt society, number one. And number two, it reveals that the government, however much we in America may enjoy criticizing it, lambasting it, or even going so far as to say the government should get out of the economy, without understanding that the government has been, at least for the last century, absolutely fundamental to one of the largest industries that keeps the American economy going, namely the industry of building homes, maintaining homes, furnishing homes, and all the rest. So the American housing industry is a peculiar institution whose consequences are to bring the government into a central supportive role of our economy and to put our population in a perpetual condition of debt. We place between the person in the home, the family in the home, and the home, we place the person of the banker. We place the institution of debt. And that means that every bank is involved in this country heavily in the whole housing industry. Well, banks are private profit institutions. They are looking all the time for ways to make more money. Their job is to accept deposits from businesses and individuals and then to find profitable ways to lend that money out. That's what banks do. So housing, because it is such an issue in this country, it has always been a place where banks are looking to make profitable loans. And over the last 30, 40 years, banks found themselves in a unique situation. American workers were suffering a new phenomena over the last 30 years that really never existed in our history before. From 1820 to 1970, real wages, the amount of money a worker got per hour of his or her work, had been going up. Starting in the 1970s, real wages stopped rising. Americans still haven't come to terms with the fact that here in 2010, the real wage, that is the amount of money you get adjusted for the prices you have to pay, is no higher than what it was in 1978. Well, workers then had a problem. If their wages weren't going up, how were they going to enjoy the American dream? How were successive workers going to be able to buy a home? How were the children of a couple going to be able to start a new family and own their own home as they had come to expect was their due as hardworking Americans? The answer was they weren't going to buy a house with rising wages because their wages weren't rising anymore. And so the American working class, to realize the American dream that had been promised to them, had to go more and more into debt. There was no way to afford more houses, to afford a better house, to improve your house. None of those things that are so essential to so many Americans were possible without higher debt than ever before. So banks found themselves in short with an incredible demand for loans because people had no other way to realize this American dream of home ownership and so forth. And you know, if you have profit-making institutions with an increasingly desperate customer base, then the chances for these banks to take advantage of this situation, the temptation was so enormous that very few banks were able to resist. And here's what I mean. They lent more and more money because they could, because the demand for this money was endless. They lent to people who couldn't afford it, but who were willing to borrow anyway and to put themselves into a very dangerous situation. Banks were supposed to be careful and not do that, but there was so much money to be made that they forgot about their obligations to assess risk and all that, and they lent kind of wildly. One more factor that has to be explained is the fact that banks discovered a new gimmick. Started in the 1970s, as so much of this current crisis began then. And the new gimmick is easy to explain. What banks discovered was that no sooner had they made a loan to an American family to buy a home or expand a home or whatever, but the bank could then sell that loan to an investor somewhere else in the world. And literally what this means is, for most American families, and they may not understand that to this day, they are used to sending a monthly check to whatever the local bank was that they got their mortgage from. But in truth, what that bank is mostly doing in America today is simply taking that payment and sending it off to the investor, who could be anybody, anywhere in the world, who actually owns the loan that the people are paying off who live in the house. And so then the banks had no limits anymore. Now they could give a loan to any American at any kind of, under any circumstances, because the bank wasn't stuck with a loan that the American homeowner couldn't pay back, since the bank had long ago passed that loan on to somebody else who was stuck in the end. And so what interestingly happened is banks around the world, large corporations around the world, investors around the world became the ultimate lenders, and that prompted the American banks to simply go on a lending spree, the likes of which we have never had before in the United States. And so you had growing borrowing by American workers, but since the wages didn't go up, the American workers who borrowed more and more, sooner or later would reach a point, and that's what happened in 2007, when they couldn't carry it anymore. When they simply could not, since their wages weren't going up, they simply couldn't earn enough money, even if they had multiple jobs, even if the adult women went out to work outside the home in ways they hadn't before. They just could not keep up an economic situation that was sitting on a mountain of debt. And when they couldn't pay back, when the American worker was exhausted because his wages hadn't gone up in 30 years, you had an economy collapse the way we have now. Workers can't make the payments on their homes, so they lose their homes. Workers can't make the payments on their credit cards, so they can't borrow anymore. They can't use their credit cards. So the stores in the mall can't sell. You have that kind of cascading explosion on the way down that capitalism as a system has so often in its history. Only this time, housing was kind of the front wave of the process.